Coming up on today's episode of Needed Conversations.
Most people, they want to control their spouse and how they behave and the things that they do. And I think once you get into the marriage, you realize pretty quickly that it doesn't get you anywhere.
You can get up every single day with the mindset that your marriage is holding you back. Or you can get up every single day and say to yourself, I'm going to be the best version of myself. I'm going to fulfill my purpose and I'm going to lead by example. And I'm not going to allow any set of circumstances to give me an excuse to not do what God has called me to do.
You can't make them do something. You have to accept where they are and continue to encourage them and just be a good example. If you feel discouraged, maybe your spouse is not on board, I wrote down a couple of things that you can do.
The devil is not fighting us based on where we are. The devil is fighting us based on our potential.
Hey there, and welcome back to another Needed Conversations with Ryan and Viktoriya Cole, as we are continuing our conversation about personal commitment, the power of a personal commitment. We started this conversation last week, which is actually season 7. It's hard to believe that we have been having so many conversations already. But my question to you is, how are you doing? How are you doing on those personal commitments? Did the conversation that we have last week make you reevaluate where you are on those goals? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm dandy.
Well, I think it's important that when we have these Needed Conversation podcast episodes, that we inject our life and our story into it, because that's what is, I think, going to help you guys the most. Last week, we talked about personal discipleship and personal commitment to yourself. Even in the fact that most marriages, you're going to have some conflict about how committed each of you are at what phase and in what categories, and the expectations that we can put on our spouses that maybe they don't have the capacity for, and then we feel disappointed. And Viktoriya and I have had our fair share of those things, including the fact that I've struggled with my weight most of my life. And when Viktoriya and I first started dating, I was around this size, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
And then right around the time, maybe a couple weeks before we started dating, I entered into a fitness competition. And so we found ourselves at the end of 6 months looking differently. Me in particular, I lost 60 pounds in 90 days. And then by the time we got married, 6 months after that, so about 9 months, I was 100 pounds lighter.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kept that off for several years. And then through life and kids and all of that, it's come back on. But I've been really committed to the last 6 weeks as to getting that together, because we are in a building phase of our life and ministry. But it has been a challenge for us to kind of navigate that, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think even like talking about the physical aspect of it, I think people can look on the external and judge based on what they see of where you are in your life and how undisciplined you are. But I think some of the things that a lot of people don't know about Ryan is that he is definitely a go-getter, and he is just like all in or all out. And when he is focused on something, he puts 100% effort on it. And that's why he was so successful in losing that 100 pounds. I think was like within like 6 months. It was like crazy. For most people, that would have been like a 3 or 4 year commitment that they would have had to do. So I think.
But I also found, I'm sorry to
No, go ahead.
interject, just that my obsession was so extreme that the obsession to become a certain size was a burden in and of itself.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that we had to learn, like that's how he functions sometimes. So there are certain things that's like the healthy thing, and then there's like the extreme of it. And so just trying to find that right balance of what is actually going to be feasible and long term, where you can now say, okay, I need to make a change to where this is going to have to be like a lifestyle.
But I would say
thing.
over the last 2 years in particular, I have been resetting my mind as it relates to managing my weight, and not just for the sake of looking good or fitting into clothes, which is all great things, but also so that my body is well equipped to handle the assignment that God has placed upon my life. But in particular, as it relates to marriage and commitment, like Victoria and I have two vastly different strategies as it relates to fitness and health. She's very committed and consistent. And I think that we have struggled with the back and forth of trying to help one another.
Yeah, and what that support actually look
What
like?
does that support look like?
Yeah, and I think that was a tricky thing because it's very easy to say, well, I'm successful on this side. Why don't you come and join my strategy? Well, that strategy may not work for your spouse. They may do it for like a month or so, but then it's like it's not their personal strategy, so it's not something that they've personally have committed to them to do. And so the reason why we're having this conversation about the power of your personal commitment to yourself is because when you make up the mind to do it, you're going to follow through it versus
That's
doing
right.
it for somebody else. And it's the same in your marriage. You can force somebody to do it, and they may do it like a month or two. And most couples, when they come to counseling session, what do they say? Yeah, it worked for like a month or two, and then he stopped doing it. And I'm like, because it was never natural to him. Like it wasn't something that this person committed to themselves. They have to want to do that change themselves. And that's
Yeah.
a very challenging thing in most marriages.
One of the things we always tell to couples is that we call it mediation because counseling or therapy, I think we need spaces to talk and
Yeah.
to explore the depth of the pain that we've experienced in our life. But at some point, you can start marinating in that to the degree that you can't see a path forward. And so while we do acknowledge the past and we have to feel it in order to then deal and heal, you can't go forward if you stay in that place. So we, instead of sitting in that, let's explore the past, really the first session, we kind of understand a couple's history and then we move into, okay, what is the path forward?
Mm-hmm.
And we like to call it mediation instead of counseling because we don't want to give you a one-size-fits-all solution because not all marriages are one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
There are certain standards that God has for marriage that all of us should adhere to, but the dynamics of your relationship are going to depend on many different variables, including your individual purpose, how that works in tandem with the purpose of your spouse, your personality, your extrovertedness, your introvertedness, the dynamics of your family, your traditions growing up, how many kids you have, how you're managing your responsibilities, and all of those things play a factor in the strategy that you choose. So I always say going into it, the strategy that you create is the strategy that you own.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we try to come in and say, you should do X, Y, and Z. We say, have you considered this? Are you willing to make these efforts here? What can you do? What can you commit to? And let that couple determine what is the strategy that's going to work for them collectively, but also individually, and not putting undue pressure. This is what you hear your spouse saying that they need from you. But what is realistic? What are you actually willing to commit to? And let's starting there because we can build from that place of honesty and not from a place of, which most spouses end up in, giving their spouse what they want to hear. To say, I know that this is what's going to make you quote unquote happy. So let me just say that I can commit to doing that and then end up letting you down in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about we reset our expectations and let's reframe the conversation and really take personal ownership over what we are actually willing to bring to the table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say if you can remember this phrase from this episode, this will really help your marriage. Acceptance versus approval. Like, where is that boundary line of I accept you for who you are and even the challenges that you come up with, the thorns in the flesh. But there's definitely the thing of approval. Like, I may not approve of those things and make it vocal. Hey, I don't think that it's appropriate for where we are or for with our children. I don't want this to be passed on to them. I accept you and I love you and I'm going to love you through this thorn in the flesh, so to speak, but it doesn't mean that you should tolerate a specific inappropriate behavior from your spouse.
You have a right to create boundaries within your home, within your interactions with your spouse, but then to a certain degree, you have to accept where they are and allow the Holy Spirit to be the one to process in them that transformation that you're believing for.
See, I think most people want to take control of that. Like
Yep.
they'll see a thing in their spouse, even like before they get married. Sometimes they'll go like, "Oh, this little thing, it kind of irks me, but I think I can change that whenever I get in." And I think once you get in the trenches of marriage, you realize you can't control that person. You can't control their decisions. You can't control what they do, what they say, how they behave. And I think if you learn to accept them for who they are and then pray through it, I think in the interim, God is going to work through your personal development, your character development, and he's also going to work on your spouse's heart. I just feel like most people, they want to control the narrative. They want to control their spouse and how they behave and the things that they do. And I think once you get into the marriage, you realize pretty quickly that it doesn't get you anywhere. You normally end up fighting. You normally start arguing and feel like you're not getting anywhere with this person. But as soon as you relinquish that control
Mm.
and actually accept that person, again, acceptance versus approval, and allow the Holy Spirit to do the work inside of your spouse instead of you trying to do it yourself, then I feel like you're going to be more at peace, number one. Number two, you're going to be more committed to your own self and what God has called you to do. And then in the interim, he's going to give you wisdom and strategies on how to approach your spouse, or what to pray over them, what to speak over them, the people you need to connect with to seek wisdom and guidance, just as we said before. So these are some of the things, if you guys can remember that, I think that will be instrumental in your marriage.
Yes. And I think that it's really important, if you're listening to this, and some people do who are single and dating, that you find out these things beforehand, because once you've entered into this covenant, right, you don't have a chance to second guess and say, well, I didn't know this was the thorn in their flesh, and then to be able to step out of it. No, at that point, apart from adultery, abuse, and those rare circumstances, you have to commit yourself to that relationship. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But once you're in it, it doesn't mean that change isn't possible, but you have to approach change through the pathway of acceptance. And like Viktoriya said, relinquishing control to the Holy Spirit, and controlling what you can control, which is your own decisions, your own responses, because the vast majority of couples that are struggling in marriage, they feel like, how can I do what I'm called to do if my spouse isn't supporting me? Well, you can get up every single day with the mindset that your marriage is holding you back, or you can get up every single day and say to yourself, I'm going to be the best version of myself. I'm going to fulfill my purpose, and I'm going to lead by example. And I'm not going to allow any set of circumstances to give me an excuse to not do what God has called me to do.
Yeah, I had a principal in middle school, and he was just like, he was a very interesting guy. He would always have dress pants on and a crisp white shirt. You could tell he got up early in the morning and like really steamed it. But he would get up into the announcements, and he was a tall guy, and he was very adamant about a specific protocol, like right side of the hall. Like he'll come out of his office and tell us right side of the hall, but he will get on the announcements and he'll say, by the end of the announcements, make it a great day or not, the choice is yours. Like every time. And we were just so sick and tired of hearing that. But I mean, it stuck with me because it really does help you understand that nobody else is in control of how you're going to wake up and feel. Nobody can do it for you, but it's your personal decision that you have to wake up and say, I'm going to have a great day. I'm going to discipline myself. I have these things in my radar, and with God's help, I'm going to be able to accomplish them. And that's not how you need to have an outlook on life every single morning that you wake up, even if you are struggling in your marriage.
So let's examine your marriage just a little bit. We have a few more minutes in this episode. Viktoriya and I are in a building year, and most people look from the outside in and they say, we have it all together. They're marriage ministers or counselors, whatever you want to call us, that they must have the perfect marriage. The fact of the matter is that the best of us, the ones that are helping lead the charge, we still have struggles and challenges that we have to overcome. You know why? Because the devil is not fighting us based on where we are. the devil is fighting us based on our potential. And for
Mm-hmm.
example, I woke up this morning. We've been in a very productive building season, made some very effective decisions. I go to the gym and I am experiencing the spiritual warfare in my mind. And I feel it compounding, the enemy injecting thoughts. And it takes only a few seconds for either that thought to take root or for you to have the wherewithal to reject it. And I immediately started rejecting, but still it was a bombarding of thoughts. And then coming home, and Viktoriya and I, over the last couple of days, have been wrestling with our responsibilities. And we had a very deep conversation that was triggered by just a comment about one of the projects that we have going on around the house. And we have to still, at this point, acknowledge both of us has a different assignment
Mm-hmm.
while working in tandem with one another. And we have to be able to step outside of our own weighty responsibilities and see from our spouse's vantage point. And that's what I think true support is really about. It's holding yourself accountable, but at the same time, being able to sit where your spouse sits and have those tough conversations with yourself to say, wow, they are carrying as just, if not more, of a heavy load than I am. How can I show up for them every single day and offer them support without feeling like I'm adding to their list of responsibilities? How would you say that you viewed the challenges that we've been going through this morning and just the battle that we're facing with how much responsibility we have, and also not just staying committed to yourself, like what we've been talking about, but on the other end, offering support to your spouse while they're operating in a realm that you're not operating in?
I mean, it could be a very lonely place, even if you're like working in tandem, like that your spouse is doing a specific part of it and you couldn't do it without them because that's this aspect that they're providing. But then you also feel like you're doing a very big portion of it as well. And sometimes I think when we don't communicate for a long time, it may feel like you're by yourself, you're doing this by yourself, and that your spouse may not necessarily care. But that's not necessarily true. I think it's just because we're so busy and inundated with so many things to do that we have to be very strategic with how we approach work. And this is why setting goals is so important for yourself. But I think this also helps you to communicate together. Like, what are we doing? Where are we going?
Right.
Where is our time going? Because we only have 24 hours in a day. And it's like, I'm already overwhelmed by the 24 hours in a day that I have trying to be strategic and make sure that I'm bringing in a specific income or finishing these assignments or obligations or making sure we're present for the kids, making sure we're present for our families. Maybe something has come up where it's like throws us off completely with our rhythm because now we're having to deal with our parents or something like that. Like life constantly throws curveballs. And this is why it's so important for you to have this open conversation, not from a defensive point, but coming to them probably in a time where maybe you're winding down for the night and saying, hey, I'm feeling a little like by myself in this corner, or I need help in this area. And most of us as couples, I think we struggle with that. I think we normally do it in passing and then we get defensive because it's like, well, I'm also doing a ton of stuff. But
I
yeah.
think that that's the key right there, is that when you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders, any little conversation can feel like an attack against, well, I'm already carrying the weight of the world. How much more do you want from me?
Yeah.
And Viktoriya's feeling it on her end. Like, I make a comment about a project and she takes it to heart because this is her life. This is where she's operating 80% of the time, working with her hands around the house, projects. The house that we're in right now is an investment property that eventually we're going to have land and move from here within the next few years, if not sooner. So we're looking at this house as an investment. And then on the other side of things, I'm handling a lot of things with business and the ministry aspect of it. And so I'm here 80%, she's there 80%, and we cross over on 20% of the time. So then when either one of us steps into each other's space, the first instinct for us is to be defensive, because it's hard to see from the other side. So I think it's coming into these conversations with intentionality, offering your spouse a whole lot of grace, and doing your best to try to see it from their point of view and not allow that to frustrate you to the point where you're willing to roll over and allow the enemy to come in and distract you from what it is that you're really supposed to be doing.
If you feel discouraged by maybe your spouse is not on board, I wrote down a couple of things that you can do to kind of help them get on board with what you guys are doing or what you guys are trying to accomplish. Number one is ask for counseling. I think most people like wait till the last minute when they are literally like on the last thread, and most of the time they come for counseling for almost like the approval of, I just need your stamp of approval for leaving. That's really why they're not coming for counseling.
So that they could say, we went to counseling and it didn't work.
And
Yes.
it's such a bad, people get such a bad, I don't know why counseling is such a bad rep, gets such a bad rep from, there's so much shame attached to it when it says in Proverbs about seeking help, asking for wise counsel, that's a wise thing to do. I mean, if you read Proverbs, you'll constantly see that, like, seek out wisdom. And there's wisdom in people that have already walked through that phase and that can give you, like, here is where you are in your life and here is some of the things that you need to do. Most people, once they leave, they're like, wow, I feel like this burden lift off of me because number one, I'm not by myself. We're not the only ones going through it.
You don't feel crazy.
Yeah. So there's no shame in asking for help. Number two.
Plus, before you go on to that, I think that the counseling aspect, or what we call mediation, can feel medical, especially for men. And also it feels like if I'm going to ask someone for wisdom or whatever, then that means that we are in the worst possible scenario. Like, we want to avoid that because it's almost admitting that our marriage is in the dumpster fire. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just a little speed bump that you need help to overcome. And on the other side of it, there's many couples that we counsel one time. And they're like, wow, that helped tremendously. It helped us overcome that little bump. And a lot of times it isn't as medical as you would think. It's not as intrusive. It's just really helping you guys to see from a different vantage point. And maybe it's not like coming to us, although we have that. If you go to our website, you can book a session with us. Finding trusted leaders, pastors, mentors, who you can say, how did you handle this season of your life? Does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. And then number two, encourage them and pray for them. But again, I think that if you ask for counseling, I think you'll get a better strategy of how to approach your spouse. And then I think your prayers are probably going to be more effective versus praying for God to change their hearts.
Praying manipulative prayers.
Manipulative prayers. I think that's a good step too.
Genuinely pray for them.
Yeah. Number three, don't nag or make them feel about their personal decisions or lack of. And
don't make them feel bad.
Yeah. What did I say?
I don't know. You skipped over.
Don't make them feel bad. I said don't nag.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Don't nag or make them feel bad about their personal decisions.
You can't make them do something. You have to accept where they are and continue to encourage them and just be a good example. Sometimes your spouse can find encouragement just by seeing you be more disciplined. So maybe what's waiting on that good side is you making a decision for yourself and saying, I'm going to do that, even if my spouse is not doing it. And that will encourage them to also make that decision to be more committed and be more disciplined. And the last one is about be vocal about what God is speaking to you and tell them what you want to accomplish so that they are aware of that and they're also able to support you in that way, whether it's through prayer or maybe it's just something to ponder for them and say, hey, my spouse is really passionate about this and I think I need to make a way or make them feel supported in this way. So how can we set the budget aside for them to do what they are wanting to do or what God is calling them to do? And how can I be more of a supportive spouse in that area?
I think most couples take an all-in or an all-out approach. Either they're all in this with me or they're not able to have any space with me in this. And we become super independent. And when we're talking about personal commitment, we're not talking about you off by yourself. And a lot of times, if it's rooted in a bad place, you can want to achieve these certain goals to spite your spouse, to show them you can do it by yourself, right? That's pride, that's arrogance, and that is not going to cause your marriage to become stronger. You have to examine your life and say, what is my spouse's purpose, where he thrives most? Where do I thrive most? And then go and find the places where you are able to cross over and work together. And then in those other areas where you don't have crossover, you're still called to be an encourager, a supporter, and to pray for them. And to pray for yourself too, that God give you the eyes to see. One of the things that we've said over and over again is that passion is fully in your control. That scripture that we say, what is it? Set your delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So he's the one who places the desire there as you are delighting in him. And we use that in the same way with marriage to say, you may not have any gift or skill set or any desire personally to do what your spouse is called to do over here. But what you are called to do is to support and pray for them. And also in your praying, as you see them in their gift, right? The Lord will activate inside of you this holy passion for them to just acknowledge them. We went this past weekend as we close out here, and I ministered at this event, and Viktoriya was there as a support. She handles book sales and she's praying with me and those sorts of things. But this is my thing primarily. It's my calling to study, to teach in this in-depth way, and just little things that she says along the way or things that she posts on social media. I know that she's proud of me. Even though it's not something that she feels called to, I know that she's proud of me and that she goes and supports, and she's able to see from my vantage point, even though it's something she really doesn't want to do, it's what she does because she knows it's what I'm called to do. And the same thing, like when I see Viktoriya complete a project and she's so passionate about the end result and she makes money from it, or she helps to change someone's life, like I'm there and I acknowledge it and I see it, and it makes me appreciate who she is and what she's called to do, even though I'm not called to do it as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter what your spouse's goals and ambitions are. There's a way for you guys to support one another, and just, again, like Ryan said, try to walk in their shoes with their responsibilities, what their desires and passions are. And I think that'll help you see a better vantage point of how can I better support them and how can we work better together in accomplishing these goals, and also making sure that my spouse feels fulfilled in that role instead of being burdened by, I can't accomplish this because my wife does not approve of this or doesn't accept it.
You know, as we end out, we're talking about commitment. The name of this series is called Built to Last. I think it's about managing the expectations that you have on your spouse and what support you actually need to fulfill your purpose. We talk to so many couples that want to drag their spouses along for the ride in a way that is breaking them. It's unrealistic for them. And once they set their spouse free, they can actually feel the love and support and their spouse championing them along the way. And then you have areas together where you say, this is where your purpose and my purpose come together to form one mission that we stand behind as a family. For some people, there may be a whole lot more lines of intersection than others. Viktoriya and I have the privilege of not working a 9 to 5 because we're more entrepreneurial and we have ministry. But even with us who have more crossovers, there are definitely areas where we dominate, where we have more of a skill set in, and we have had to learn to accept and set each other free to do what we're called to do, so that collaboratively we're making the whole thing make sense. Mm-hmm. And that's how you build to last. By not trying to pull your spouse out of their grace and into a space where you're graced, but by working collaboratively with them, accepting them, loving them, but being committed to fulfilling the purpose that God has for you. Any last words, Viktoriya?
No, this has been a needed conversation, and we hope that you're staying committed to the things that you have set your mind to do, despite the challenges that you may be facing in your marriage. If you do need help, reach out 864-428-7131 with questions, or if you wanted to book a session with us, we also have some resources online, moremostforever.com.
Social media,
Social media, same thing at moremostforever.
Facebook,
Yeah.
Instagram, TikTok. And I want to give a little plug. I'm going to be launching a brand new podcast, and it's called Breaking Through the Noise. If you are wanting discipleship, if you are wanting spiritual growth and learning more about the Bible, I did a little survey last week online, and the biggest thing people wanted to know was how to pray more effectively. They wanted to know about the church and how they can better fit into the kingdom model for the church instead of just going to attend, learning more about the fivefold ministry. So this is more in depth as it relates to your Christian discipleship and less so about marriage in particular. That's going to be going live soon, so be on the lookout for that. I'm going to send out a text, and for all those who are wanting more information, you can text us and just type spiritual or spiritual growth. That'll put you right into that tag or that thread to receive updates about breaking through the noise, wanting to bring truth in a world of chaos and confusion, moving beyond the opinions to what the Bible says is true and how we should be living. So be on the lookout for that. And until next time,
We'll see you guys next time
this
on
has
Needed
been
Conversation.
Needed Conversations. God bless.